Well, good evening and welcome to Eastleigh Borough Council's Cabinet meeting of the 22nd of October 2020. This meeting is a virtual meeting being broadcast live, courtesy of Microsoft Teams Live. In attendance this evening, we have a full complement of the Council's Cabinet members. My name is Keith House, I'm leader of the Council. Other colleagues will come in when they want to speak, either on items to do with their portfolios or as contributing to the general debate. Also in attendance this evening, we have a variety of support staff who again will come in if necessary, particularly if there are really awkward, tricky questions that we don't know the answers to. And in addition, we have Councillor Margaret Atkinson, the leader of the Conservative group, in attendance this evening. So this is a routine business meeting of the Council. We'll be considering a variety of policy issues that are of importance to the future of our borough, and colleagues will be contributing to those as they wish during the course of the meeting. All of the papers for the public part of the meeting are available online at www.eastleigh.gov.uk for anyone who wishes to follow those individual papers. First up on the agenda is always public participation, where we welcome any members of the public who want to speak on items that are not on the Council's agenda this evening. And this evening there are none, so we can move straight on to take the minutes of the meeting that were held on the 17th of September this year. I'll just look around my virtual room to see if anyone has got any issues they want to raise with those. If not, we will take those as agreed and read. Yep. We can equally skip past agenda item 3, apologies, because everyone is present, and move to agenda item 4, which is declarations of interest, where any councillors can declare any interest in relation to items of business that they have that will then be recorded in the minutes. And those would, depending on that interest, preclude them from voting on that item or indeed potentially even speaking. Does anyone have any interest they wish to declare? I'm seeing lots of councillors around the borough in their homes shaking their heads no, so we'll move on from there and move to our first substantive item of business, which is a paper on restarting food waste. This is a really important service for the council, which in Eastleigh we are the only council to roll across the entirety of our district, but it had to be suspended earlier in the year as a result of the epidemic on COVID, partly because of splashback issues, because of the issue of potentially infecting members of staff, but also because of the difficulty of maintaining the right number of members of staff in the crews of cabs. We are now able to restart the service, and I'll ask Rupert Curl, Cabinet Member for Environment, to speak on this item. Rupert.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say I think you've covered things very admirably in your introduction to that. As you'll see, members, the paper really does set out in quite a lot of detail, in effect, really the options that we were looking at. As Keith has already alluded to, the service was obviously paused because of the COVID health emergency, and obviously we've been working hard to try and bring forward a credible alternative, in effect, to be able to restart that service. As obviously the health emergency has obviously moved on. The real issue obviously is about social distancing at this time, and clearly obviously we have been following government advice and health specialist advice with regards to that. What we've then come up with obviously is a preferred option, which is obviously to hire in vehicles and extra staff to be able to actually have a standalone service, which will obviously deliver food waste service back obviously online. And obviously I'm very pleased to see that obviously we are going to be doing that and going live again on the 9th of November. Obviously I think, as you've seen from the report, the actual decision in effect to actually move forward with this so that we can actually meet that 9th of November deadline has already been taken under the emergency powers, which obviously have been the decision in effect of the leader, Councillor House, and obviously the Chief Executive. But obviously this paper is being brought forward to you this evening, obviously hopefully that you will agree with the approach that has been taken, and obviously, as I said, as Councillor House has said, you know, this is a very valued service that our residents in effect have actually obviously been increasingly asking when this is going to be relaunched, and obviously it's really great from the environmental perspective. We are the only council in Hampshire that actually does deliver this service and have done for a number of years. Which is obviously great because it minimises the waste that goes into the black bin, which is reducing the tonnages, but also it's really good for the environment because obviously that's then diverted to AD plants in effect to actually generate clean electricity. So it's a really good thing. It's very, very positive. I'm glad we're able to actually deliver this back because I know residents really do value this service, and I hope that members will support the proposal this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Rupert. As Rupert has said, there is a cost to introducing this service in the way that we are doing at the moment, because we are having to hire in additional equipment. That will be a cost of £82,000 this year, but this is a flagship service that meets a lot of demand from residents. I certainly was aware very, very quickly that as soon as the press release went out from the council saying that we were about to relaunch this, my inbox was flooded with yes please and thank you and bring it on, and other equivalent words, and so we're very pleased to do that, and that's very encouraging. So I've got Councillor Atkinson wishing to come in. I think Councillor Atkinson, your camera was off, but it's now coming back on again. So the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Chairman. Just very briefly to say I'm delighted this service is coming back online. It's very, very welcome. I'm thrilled to bits that that has happened. But my understanding is that this is a restricted service initially to test it to make sure that it is working. Can I just ask how long that's going to be and when will the full service be available to everybody? Thank you.
Right, I think, Margaret, you've probably confused two different initiatives the council is doing at the moment. The restarting of food waste starts to everyone who was previously running with the food waste service. That starts from the 9th of November. Separately on the 9th of November, we're introducing a pilot of bringing together the collection days for residents in those pilot areas, which is about 10% of the borough. Residents will have their waste collected of each of their different waste streams on the same day each week, so they don't have to remember whether something slips from Tuesday to Wednesday or Wednesday to Thursday or Thursday to Friday or Friday to Monday based on their waste stream. And that will also be a pilot which will introduce alternate weekly collection of glass instead of monthly collection of glass, and also we'll start the rollout of a service for food waste collection for flats for the first time. So it's a big enhancement of the service. That pilot will be running to 10% of homes across the borough from the 9th of November, at the same time as we reintroduce food waste collection for all residents. So helpfully raised the issue, because it's just quite confusing that we're doing two different things on the same day, but we did consider that on balance it was worth doing. The front page of Borough News will be clear about both of these different initiatives, so that hopefully, with a little bit of extra publicity that hopefully we can all give to residents as well along the way, we'll be able to make sure that people get this one right.
Thank you very much indeed for that clarification, because yes, it certainly did need clarification, and I'm glad it's going to be in the Borough News, but delighted the service is back. Thank you. Brilliant.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Paul Bittner wanted to come in next. We go straight to him.
Thank you, Councillor House. Yeah, fully endorse everything that's been said, and it's great that this service is coming back in for all the reasons that Councillor Curl and Councillor House have said. But there's also another bonus with it as well, something that's actually often overlooked with the food waste, and that's the fact that actually I've got a great big pile of paper that needs shredding, which I can now actually put in the food waste bin rather than the black bin. I did post it on social media, and it's quite surprising how many people didn't realise that you could put shredded paper in your food waste bin. So I do wonder how much of that is actually going in black bins. But yeah, great to see it coming back. Can't wait. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Paul. At the moment, I've got no one else indicating they want to speak. So the recommendation in front of us is to note the decision that was taken by the Chief Executive in consultation with me to restart the service, and to approve the £82,000 of additional revenue growth for the current financial year, to make sure that we can do this in a safe way. Colleagues continue to do that. Again, I look around the room virtually and see lots of people nodding, so that's fine. We can take that as that and then move on to the next paper, which is a government consultation on changes to the planning service, the planning white paper, and the council has drafted a quite lengthy response. And I want to pay tribute to Graham Tuck and the team in planning policy, who spent a lot of time working through this white paper and giving some really thoughtful and sensible commentary on the government's proposals to change the planning function. There are two sort of key themes that really run through our response. Firstly, the planning system largely isn't broken. As we've demonstrated in Eastleigh, if you put commitment behind the planning process, you can make it work. Now, we know there are all sorts of parts of the country where that doesn't always happen for a variety of reasons. We certainly see that the planning function is one about not just issuing planning permissions, but actually trying to improve the quality of our borough, whether that's for homes, for jobs, or for the environment. And you can do it if you put the welly into it, and we certainly have here over the years. So saying actually the planning system isn't broken is a key theme for us in our response. We know that in the past, when the government has changed planning policy, it tends to create a bit of a hiatus in the planning sector, where investors or developers or landowners just press pause for a period of time while they think through what the implications of changes in planning legislation are, and that results in delays in the delivery of affordable housing, delays in the delivery of new employment premises, delays in environmental improvements that require planning approval, and that's a bad thing, both for our economy and for the quality of life of our residents. So a common theme that the government wants to identify that the planning system is broken, we don't agree with. It's not. It can be improved, it can be refined, of course. The other critical theme that we develop in our response is that planning works best where it's locally decided. We practice what we preach here with our local area committees, where every one of our councillors is forced to be a planner, whether they like it or not, because they're involved in taking decisions for their local community in their local area committee. No remote distant planning committee that takes decisions on behalf of everyone else, quite the reverse. Everyone gets the opportunity to be involved, and not only that, we take those decisions in public, even if it's virtually in public, with the opportunity for people to speak and residents to participate in those meetings, to have their say and make sure their voice is heard. So government proposals move away from that in many areas. We've even gone further in our response in saying that we should row back from more decisions being made by the planning inspectorate on the grounds that that takes decisions away from local people and from locally elected representatives. The detail paper is pretty lengthy. I don't imagine that we want to crawl through every line of it this evening, because I know that colleagues will have had an opportunity over the course of the last few weeks to work through those issues. But does anyone wish to speak on this item this evening? At the moment,
yes, I do wish to speak on this, please.
Okay, in which case, David. Oops.
So, first of all, I think Graham and the team have done a tremendously good job on summarising what is quite a difficult paper that's come from government to actually summarise easily into a short space there. But I'm going to start with a quote that was in the beginning of the report, where it says the planning system is generally working well. And I would have to take a slightly different view and suggest that it does need a bit of a shake up in places. And I think the opportunity is right to do that. I certainly think the timing that the government have got of doing it now is the wrong time. It would have been better without being done when when people's minds aren't on all other things like flu viruses and stuff like that. I think for me, it's the local plan process side of the planning process overall, rather than the development control side, which needs to shake up, because I see the local plan process as being needing a pretty good rethink. I think the present system's far too slow, it's far too costly, and it probably the government are not being radical enough in their thinking about how to deal with this. So I'm pleased we're making some comments on them. I'm not going to not support them and the comments that are there, but my own personal view is that the government needs to be pretty radical on this to get them going. If I just pick a few things out, in the terms of growth, renewal and protection and the government's themes there, I can understand the growth and protection bit very easily and support that. The renewal side of it, I think there's a lack of clarity in under that headline, and I think the need, we're not just talking about regeneration, and that's a form of renewal, and I think, and yet at the same time this is looking at sort of small areas for development and things like that. I think that renewal is the wrong title, and something different needs thinking there, and it might even need the theme splitting in two in a way. There's certainly more work to be done there. I certainly agree that other than the National Planning Policy Framework and other government policy lines such as air quality, for example, and things there, the planning process needs to be bottom up and top down. Otherwise, we're not going to have people locally in different places agreeing with it. I also think there needs to be far more thought about in some of these things that like the duty to cooperate. It's fine to say abolish it, and in some ways that is the right thing to do. But I think the way in which Partnership for South Hampshire, for example, has got together across a number of authorities working together and producing a real strategy document that can work is the way forward. And I think it's that type of process which needs to replace what in many cases is just an email from one local authority to another and a claim that the duty to cooperate has been carried out. There needs to be some sort of more formal approach then. It also needs to take in paragraphs from things like Transport for the South East and other bodies which are policy forming. The 30 months is definitely too short to produce a local plan. On the other hand, I think there needs to be some form of end date with it, because otherwise we're in our own situation. The time it's taken to produce our local plan is, in my view, overall should be seen as unacceptable. It's far too long and far too costly for the council and community to pay for. So I think there needs to be a sort of cut-off time that the government has quite reasonably suggested, though their time again is far too short a scale. So I would sort of suggest that it ought to be done in 4 years. And that would be a reasonable time to get something underway there. The examination stage is something else I don't care for and don't agree with and think needs scrapping. And I think that needs to be replaced by some form of continuous assessment throughout the whole period in partnership with the Planning Inspectorate, so that each box of themes of policies gets ticked off along the way, so that there's no need for an examination in public at the end of it and all that goes with that. And beautiful and sustainable places, yes, all good stuff, but beautiful really isn't the word that should be describing that. It should be about creating sustainability, economic and environmental sustainability, and about creating senses of community and place. And I think just saying talking about a beautiful location isn't really what it's all about, but great design, great layout of community assets and so on, that is the important thing that comes through there. So in conclusion, I think, so it's not to ramble on forever, I think the planning system must aid housing delivery, and that, in fact, the housing delivery is the thing that needs to replace the 5-year land supply as the key marker as far as I'm concerned. Create the sense of community and place and be central to a sustainable environment and economy. And at present, I think the planning system doesn't always achieve that. And that is one of the reasons why we need to see change. And the final point is that developers also have a role to play in this, and I think that needed to be brought out in the paper that's going to government, because they can do a lot more to assist in making the planning process work smoothly, like not having pieces of land with planning permission on, like one down the road from me has got outline planning permission since about 2012, 2014, and not a single brick has been laid. I'll rest my case there.
Thank you, David. That was a tour de force. I'm reminded there was a politician, I think it was Simon Hughes actually, who would start off saying he wanted to speak about a few items, then he'd go through and the third item, and the fourth item, the fifth item. He'd often get up to about the 12th or 13th item, and then he'd have about 7 different finales. But they were always added. They always added value, and you did that, David. So thank you for that. It's a tour de force. Just a couple of comments if I can while we go through. I'll go to Tina Campbell next in a moment on this. The duty to cooperate is something which we've actually actually may work really well in South Hampshire. I know that sometimes partnership organisations aren't that popular with external people because they don't always appear to be transparent, but the Partnership for South Hampshire has always had its meetings in public. It's always had open debates, and it's always managed to leave party politics at the door. And it's even done that when councils have changed hands. Southampton changes hands just about every time the government changes hands, because typically the opposition to the current government runs the city council in Southampton. It hasn't made a bit of difference at all in terms of the quality of debate and ownership of putting South Hampshire first and trying to promote the South Hampshire economy and the South Hampshire environment. So the duty to cooperate can be made to work if there's willingness amongst local authorities to make it happen. I agree entirely, David, about the planning inspectorate and the examination. There is no Western democracy of our size or impact that has some kind of vetting process on local decision making around planning zoning. We are the exception because we live in such a centralised state in this country, and it could be done without. The reason why we don't get local plans through in time is because often the planning inspectorate takes more than 30 months to deal with the plan, not just the length of time the council takes to deal with it, it's the time the inspector and the inspectorate takes to deal with it that takes up the bulk of the time. So pulling the inspectorate out of that process is in our response, and I think it is important to do that. I'm going to ask Tina Campbell to come in next on this item. Tina.
Thank you, Chair. I think from a social policy point of view that my concerns are around the expansion of permitted development, and to obviously make sure that that doesn't lead to poor quality housing. And obviously I'm concerned to make sure that any changes don't affect affordable housing, either in terms of quality or quantity. And I would echo everything that David was saying in terms of the importance of placemaking. I think that's really important. So thank you.
Thank you, Tina, for that. And the point about permitted development rights, for those who don't follow the jargon, it's where a developer doesn't require planning permission to make a change, and sometimes a change that could be quite dramatic. And we've seen this in Eastleigh recently with the former office building, Mitchell House, next to the council's multi-storey car park back onto Southampton Road, being converted into flats. It didn't require planning permission to do that. The consequence of the developer doing it is the developer didn't have to make any contribution to local services or facilities that would normally be part of the planning process, despite the fact that more people will be there and they will be requiring local services. No issue about provision of affordable homes, no issue about quality of space, no issue about local amenity space for the residents involved, simply the ability to do it because the government says you don't need planning permission to make those kind of changes. So good to have raised that. Thank you, Tina. I've got nobody else at this stage indicating they want to speak on the side. I have Derek. Derek, did I miss you? Did I jump across you to go to Tina first? I apologise. Go on then, Derek.
Oh, right. Thank you very much. David's actually covered many of the points that I was going to raise. My concern with the proposals that the government are coming out with, I cannot see how you can allocate housing to an area by a mathematical algorithm. The more houses you have in an area, the more people want to live there, so it grows exponentially. And areas that should have housing get low priority, so I would worry about that. David touched on the duty to cooperate. I think that's vital. I know we have quite a good working relationship with the boroughs and districts around us, but I think it could be stronger. I think when you look at the comments we get from residents, say Whiteley, which is actually part of Winchester, but is 12-15 miles from Winchester, and even down to Waterlooville, which is Winchester, there has to be a strengthening. You know, we don't want Winchester to say, well, we've got a lovely city here, we don't want any houses around it. I'm from Winchester, I wouldn't have minded seeing housing allocated to the area. It's essential to give it a vibrancy. I think the other thing is that all of these seem to refer to housing. I think from an economy point of view, we desperately need to make sure that we allocate sufficient land for industry, whether it's light industry, high tech, science parks, whatever. Without that, communities can't exist. They become a dormitory, and you're increasing your traffic, your transportation problems, and it's one that I see happening, or could see happen quite a lot if we're not careful, by making sure that we get the commercial element balanced with the residential. I know I've spoken to the chair and a colleague in Eastleigh about it on a number of occasions. I think it's important to get that balance. Without it, we do suffer. But otherwise, I think the existing planning laws seem to be working quite well. As David said, they could do with a few tweaks here and there to make them more effective. But it served us very well. The local area committees do a good job. I think a lot of authorities could learn a lot from what we do at Eastleigh. So with that, I shall sign off and let somebody else take over.
Thank you very much, Derek, and we'll go straight to Rupert Curl, and then after Rupert, we'll go straight to Paul Bittner. So, Rupert, the floor's yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Just a couple of points, actually, notwithstanding, obviously, all the comments that have already been made, which are obviously very interesting and absolutely valid. But from my perspective, there were a couple of it was very complex reading through it, obviously, as I say, and again, I'd like to echo the previous comments about the work that's gone in by Graham and his team, etc., to actually pull this together, which obviously is hugely complex. But there were a couple of issues that I did find, they may very well have been mentioned, but again, it's about the stress, in effect, really, on those particular points. One of those is about infrastructure, in effect, to actually make sure that infrastructure providers, which are clearly private companies, are actually also on train to actually work within the planning process, within either sub-regional but also in local district authority areas, to make sure that when you are planning large developments or even medium or small, that the infrastructure that you actually either have in place or would require to actually service those are definitely on their work programme, shall we say. Quite often we get the situation where we have developments where you end up with standalone sewage plants to deliver the homes. Clearly they're needed and everything else, but actually that's not really environmentally sustainable, having large tankers trunking around the place for the entire time that development is there for, which is putting more traffic, etc., and pollution, etc., on our roads. So I don't think that's particularly sustainable. So I do think there needs to be more emphasis on making sure that they are sort of drawn into the process, and clearly they have responsibilities to service and make plans to service those planned developments. Clearly, obviously, a lot of members have already spoken about the length of the plan time. I think it's madness, in a way, in my view, that you then adopt a local plan and then immediately then go into a review of that local plan to then come up with another local plan that then takes you a bit further forward in time to then do the whole process again. It's practically making an industry out of it for the sake of that. And actually what it does is doesn't give surety, in effect, to local residents and communities about where development is going to go or where it isn't going to go in the future. So I think that's hugely worrying and damaging. But from a duty of cooperation perspective, and you've mentioned the partnership with South Hampshire, etc., which I think is hugely valuable and actually should really play a bigger role in my view. Clearly not taking away sovereignty from districts and the county, etc., but clearly obviously working closer together, because I think what they should also be looking at is actually where you are having growth areas, you should then be balancing that with large areas that you are going to take out of whatever that usage is at the moment, to create more environmental buffers or environmental open spaces where wildlife can thrive, where there are going to be large designated green spaces, etc., where residents are able to then actually then leach out of their communities or their towns or whatever, villages, etc., to be able to go. And I know we do have some national parks and we do have the New Forest, etc., but they are coming under increasing pressure, as we've already heard. Obviously we have to pay or developers have to pay contributions, in effect, to the Solent, because obviously of the issues potentially of more people accessing that area. And clearly I think there needs to be a strategic view, in effect, or plan being brought forward where there is going to be growth, but there also ought to be a balance, in effect, of open space, large open space, that is then put to one side and kept there for perpetuity, in effect, to actually not only for our wildlife but the environment, but also for residents to enjoy as well. There were a couple of points which I won't go on too long, but I was interested about in the fact that in growth areas, where it says that where it's been identified as a growth area, that outline planning permission would already be deemed as being granted. I'm hugely worried about that, really, to be honest with you, because I think, and Tina raised that point as well, is that actually what you do is, yes, you're trying to speed up the process, but I think what you might end up doing is actually losing a vital element of actually being able to have scrutiny at a really early age, rather than a early stage, rather than in effect what happens is you end up with basically a huge great document full of where we're going to put the houses, and actually I think you will end up with a lesser standard of development by definition, because it will be a more of a rushed process. I think there are other things like the local plan process and the inspection stage, which obviously Councillor Airy outlined, which actually could be quite happily, as it were, chopped, which indeed would speed up the process in all of this. But I think we do need to make sure that decisions are being made thoroughly within consultation of local members, but also, more importantly, the local community. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Rupert. I'll just make a couple of comments on the back of that as you raised items there. The infrastructure issue is an interesting one, because I can see there's a real risk that many local authorities will take a view that infrastructure can't be delivered on this basis, and they will simply slide backwards on delivery of infrastructure rather than bring it forward, which is the real need. And we have here quite unusually taken an infrastructure first approach, even if it means that we forward fund infrastructure ahead of the developer making their contribution, and that's become really important. The school that was opened at Stoneham Park was opened and built because we forward funded it on behalf of the Education Authority. It wasn't the Education Authority that did that, it was the District Planning Authority that forward funded the school. That meant that the school could be opened before there was such enormous pressure on other schools that it meant that children had to be taken elsewhere out of their area for their education. There are loads of examples around the borough now where we've taken the infrastructure first approach, and indeed we'll come on to that on the next item in a moment. And Rupert, you're quite right to raise the point about wildlife and green spaces. One of the things that we've taken a view of over the course of the years, and indeed other colleague councils have in South Hampshire, is the support for the concept of a South Hampshire green belt. So that we can properly link up these green spaces to make sure we've got wildlife corridors, to make sure we've got separation of communities to avoid coalescence of settlements, and to ensure we do get that quality of space that we know matters to our residents so much. So thanks for raising those points, Rupert. We'll go to Paul Bittner next. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to express my thanks to Graham and the team for actually putting the response together. I have read the white paper, and I'm not a planner, and yeah, it was just a little bit dry, but it actually gave me an overall impression which actually concerned me. I mean, firstly, I agree with everything that's been said, and I certainly agree with Councillor Airy with reference to the local plan that the process needs to be shorter, although 30 months is certainly not feasible for a number of reasons that have already been mentioned, and also Councillor Campbell with reference to the affordable housing side, which is actually sort of one of the mentions in the response, and the concern that actually some of this affordable housing might be for first-time buyers, and we know how well that's gone. But my overall impression, rightly or wrongly, was ringing alarm bells with me when I read the actual white paper, and obviously this sort of comes back to the government's desire on devolution, and giving local authorities the power to make local decisions for local people. But my overarching view of the white paper when I read it, this was actually the complete opposite. In many respects, that this was actually a Westminster grab to take power away from local councils, so that Westminster actually made the decisions on planning and took local decisions away from local councils. So local councillors could not stand up for their local residents and build the communities that we want, that many of you have already mentioned. Our planning policy in Eastleigh, is fine. There's a couple of other things that I felt that the paper missed, and that was on the deliverability. It's sort of mentioned, but there's no substance to speed up the large developers who land bank. As Councillor Airy said, they've got a site, they've got planning permission, they haven't laid a brick. And yet in Eastleigh we've demonstrated that need not be the case, where we can actually keep up with the levels of building houses that we actually need, which actually, as the recommendation is from Graham and his team in this paper, is actually we don't need a 5-year land supply, which is a folly. and that. And with the deliverability, the whole process, the whole paper misses the point about the councils that don't actually follow the rules now. And they don't have a 5-year land supply, and they don't have a local plan. And what actions are taken against those councils? Because, and this is the part of the planning process that doesn't work, because the government will not get its target if only 1 in 5 councils is actually meeting the needs, you know, the housing needs at the end of the day. I also have concerns over the comments in the paper on the developers' contributions, S106 SIL, or whatever you want to call it. I actually read that is a grab to let developers off paying for infrastructures for local communities, and I am going to say it. I necessarily shouldn't be surprised, given that the Secretary of State has been embroiled in a decision that did just that and deprived a local community of substantial amount of money for infrastructure. And it just worries me and concerns me. I could go on, but you get the general gist of where I'm coming from. But the only other thing I am going to say with reference to all this, which comes back to councils not doing their part and what have you, algorithms. Has the government not learnt its lesson on algorithms? It would actually give Eastleigh an increase of 26% housing on what we've actually got at the moment, and let the big cities on less housing, because again the local plan sort of steers that actually we'd rather have the local developers build on the greenfield sites than the brownfield sites. So there was a lot of things that concerned me in the paper. There's condemnation up and down the country on this paper for many of those things, and many others that haven't been mentioned, and I'm not going to go into now. And I'm just pleased that we've taken the time to go through it, highlight all these things, and hopefully government will listen and will realise that planning should be locally led. And you should actually consult your local residents and not do away with duty of cares and such like, and what have you. So you can actually have a planning process that's not based on adversity, but actually based on whatever the word is, being nice to each other, and good communication. Yeah, and I'll leave it there. But so you get the general gist. So we'll have to now wait and see what they actually come back with, and then
okay,
I'll be consulting that again. So
thanks so much, Paul. Thank you for that. And being nice to each other, that's quite a nice idea, isn't it? There was I think it's the Kingdom of Bhutan that doesn't have gross national product but has a happiness index instead. I don't know whether they've made it work or not, but the idea is it's got to be a good one. Whether we could convert the local plan into a happiness project, I perhaps doubt. I think that might be stretching it a bit too far, given the difficulty of these things. But certainly avoiding algorithms, I think the government must have learned some lessons over the summer on, but maybe they haven't. We'll see. All right, well, that was an opportunity. I thought that was going to be a really short item where I would just introduce it and people say, yeah, fine, agree with the response, but you never can tell. People clearly wanted to get that off their chest. So thank you, colleagues, for doing that. That did create a debate and a discussion about some of the critical issues. Thank you for that. So we will, on the back of that, send off our response to government, and we'll see what follows. The general consensus in local government seems to be more or less in line with our response. There are different nuances, as you'd expect, from area to area, but it will give the government something to think about. It's pretty clear, I think, that some of the items that were in their white paper they're already going to back away from because they recognise they got it wrong. We will see what happens. And as I gave an assurance to Councillor Atkinson earlier this evening, when we have full proposals as opposed to white paper, we will run a member seminar for all councillors that will also invite all our parish and town councillors to give them an update on the planning process. Hopefully that might even be by that stage in person, so I imagine it'll be something like the back end of spring, early summer of next year, but time will tell. If not, it will be a very big Zoom conference because Teams won't be able to cope. All right, thank you for that. We're for agreeing those, that's helpful. We'll move on to agenda item 7, which is to take matters that have arisen from recommendations from other committees. There are two things that we need to note. not to take any decision on, that have come from Policy and Performance Scrutiny Panel, which is to update their process that they're looking at in terms of the pollution strategy. I know that Rupert Curl's been involved in that and will be going forward, and also the work that they're doing on the quality strategy, which I know that Tina Campbell has been involved in and will be going forward too. So we'll just note those. Also to raise, again, just for noting, an item that went through one of our local area committees on the 28th of September, which fits with the discussion we were having just now about forward funding for infrastructure projects and making sure that infrastructure happens alongside development, not as a late afterthought. And the Hedge End, West End and Botley Local Area Committee was looking at the development by the County Council of a new secondary school and 680 homes on land the County Council is selling off at Woodhouse Lane between Hedge End and Botley. And as part of that process, this council has agreed through the Local Area Committee to forward fund £3.2 million of support to make sure that sports facilities for the wider community can be delivered alongside the project, again, rather than waiting for all the homes to be built and then we start thinking about what's going to happen with the money for the sports facilities. So the sports facilities on land behind Woodhouse Lane, between Woodhouse Lane and Berrywood School at Hedge End, will therefore be able to go forward, and our project team is already well engaged in working through that, Harry Lee and the team, in terms of delivery, and that will provide a home for the Hedge End Rangers Football Club for the future, as well as provide a raft of community facilities for the north of Hedge End that have been lacking since Grange Park was built back in the 1990s, and that's a fantastic benefit for the existing community, alongside all the new residents of the new homes and all the pupils of the new Deer Park Secondary School. So those are all to note, which is good. I don't think there's no decisions there, so we can just take that as agreed. That brings us to the end of the public part of the meeting this evening. We now move into exempt business, and that, for anyone watching, is where the council looks at any commercial decisions it needs to take, whereby the publication of information would affect the commercial nature of the project. So at that point, we'll end this meeting and join colleagues shortly to consider the exempt item. So thank you very much for your attendance this evening, and good evening.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Good night.